So welcome to today's webinar, 6 Key Instructional Practices for Accelerating Learning and Promoting Progress for Students with Disabilities. We are excited you are able to join us today. My name is Tessie Rose Bailey, and I am the director of the Progress Center. And on the next slide, you'll see that the center was funded in 2019 to provide information, resources, tools, and technical assistance to support local educators in developing and implementing high-quality educational programming. Now, to support local educators, we share guidance, tools, resources that are based on existing research, state and federal law and policy, as well as local experiences. We also partner with a select group of local educators all over the country to develop their knowledge and skills and infrastructure to promote progress for students with disabilities, as well as seek their feedback about how we can improve our supports and resources that will be available to you. Now, the center was developed in response to the INDRU-F decision, it's on the next slide, which states that the Individualized Education Program, or the IEP, must be reasonably calculated to enable the child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. Now, under the IDEA, we look at the IEP as serving as the foundation for promoting progress for students with disabilities. And over the past year, we've released a number of tip sheets and online modules and webinars to support educators in their development of that programming. Today, however, is the first in our series of trainings and resources that we will be releasing to support local educators in implementing that well-designed programming. Now, to ensure free, appropriate public education, or what we refer to as FAPE, and improved outcomes for students with disabilities, the Progress Center supports local educators, as I mentioned, in both the development and the implementation of high-quality educational programming. Now, a well-designed IEP outlines the supports and services necessary to promote progress towards ambitious goals. However, in order for kids to really benefit from that programming, we must deliver that with a high degree of fidelity using evidence-based high leverage practices. And so today's webinar focuses on 6 of those practices that have been shown to impact students across all disability categories. Now, before we introduce our amazing presenters, we'd like to give you a chance to introduce yourself. So please take a moment to respond to the poll, which is going to pop up. And you can see that there are a number of options that you can choose, whether you're a special ed teacher, general ed teacher, administrator, related service providers. And I bet we even have some faculty, including some of the ones on our presenter list today, as well as parents. We have a lot of folks filling it in, lots of folks on today, super exciting. Probably the highest participation rate, we're around 75% right now. Thanks, Tony, for sharing. We've got parent advocates from ARC in Harris County. I used to live in Katy. And Kary, we've got some state agency folks. All right, so we're gonna launch our poll so folks can see where most of our people are coming from. What you'll find is about 26% of our folks are special educators. I think you'll be able to see that. Yep, and we've got about 26% as administrators. We've got a lot of faculty on our session today. You'll see there is the other category, which is why folks are adding their roles in the chat box. So please feel free to check those out. All right, well, welcome everyone. We're glad you could join us today. Now, I'm really excited to introduce our team of experts who will be presenting our session today. So we have Dr. Daniel Maggin, and he is an associate professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Dr. Gena Nelson is an assistant professor at Boise State University. We have Dr. Powell, who's an associate professor at the University of Texas at Austin. And we have Dr. Kary Zarate is an assistant teaching professor at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I hope I said that correctly. Now, we connected with this team following a special request from OSEP about how we could support local educators. We can go back, please. Support local educators in effectively using their American Recovery Plan funds. And the intent was to make sure that we're supporting educators and using those funds for more than just the purchase programs. While we know new programs are designed to really help promote progress, if teachers fail to use the evidence-based high leverage practices to implement those programs, then they're not going to see the benefit, right, that they expected. So as a result, our initial response to this work has been working with this amazing team in their identification of those practices and getting resources to local educators so that they can use those practices in their sites. I want to remind you that if you have any questions at any time during the presentation, please use the Q&A box. You can also use the chat box, but we'll be monitoring the Q&A box for our presenters. All right, I'm going to pass this over to Dr. Nelson.
Great, thank you for the introduction, Tessie, to both the Progress Center as well as kind of the background to the reason that we are doing a webinar today. So during today's webinar, we will first provide an overview of a research study that we conducted that supports the information that we will provide during today's webinar related to the new resources with the Progress Center. Then we will present 6 evidence-based practices that can support high-quality instruction for students with or at risk of disabilities that are based on the research study that we will begin with, as well as how they informed the development of the resources that we'll highlight today. And then after highlighting all of the resources that we have developed with the Progress Center, we will facilitate a question and answer session. Next. Thank you. We'll begin with an overview of the research related to evidence-based practices described in this webinar. Right, so if you are a member of the Council for Exceptional Children or have attended any conferences with CEC or perhaps some of their professional development, you may be familiar with the high leverage practices. So we'll briefly review the development of the high leverage practices, which we considered in our research study and in the development of the new resources. A high leverage practice briefly is a practice that occurs with high frequency, and it preserves the integrity as well as the complexity of teaching, and it's based on research. It's also a practice that can be mastered by novice teachers. CEC approved the development of high leverage practices, and then they were drafted by a team of experts in various areas of special education. The practices are based on expert recommendations, as well as the practical and ethical considerations that special education teachers need to consider while they work with students with disabilities. The team of experts also considered research that supported each of the 4 areas in which the HLPs were eventually categorized, including collaboration, assessment, social, emotional, and behavioral learning, as well as instruction. Okay, so our research study was guided by the development of the HLPs, as well as the understanding that teachers are expected to implement a lot of practices with an evidence base as they work with students with disabilities. So therefore, we were interested in investigating further the quantity of evidence, research evidence that investigated each of the high leverage practices. So before I discuss some results, I want to make 2 important notes about our research study. First, it was a very large research study and resulting paper, and we're only able to share a small snippet of that research and information today during the webinar. And then second, there are many different ways that researchers might investigate an evidence base or the degree to which the HLPs have been investigated in the literature base. So our team used one approach, and that was looking at meta-analysis research. And researchers may use meta-analyses to aid in the identification of evidence-based practices. And meta-analyses also allow for robust conclusions regarding instructional practices as well as provide a summary effect of those practices. So one of the first questions that we wanted to answer was related to which HLPs are most investigated within meta-analysis research. So as you can see from this graph, along the horizontal axis is just an illustration of all of the HLPs, as well as along the vertical axis, which is the number of meta-analyses that we discovered that reported information on the high leverage practices. So the HLPs that are highlighted in green are the HLPs that we identified as having the greatest amount of evidence from meta-analyses that we used to then inform the development of the resources with the Progress Center. Next slide. We were also interested in exploring the frequency of meta-analyses and studies within meta-analyses according to disability and risk categories. So this figure, which is kind of hard to see all of the details, shows along the vertical axis of the figure the HLP categories. And then along the horizontal axis, the bottom, shows the IDEA disability categories, as well as on the far right, some risk categories that our research team identified. And the darker the square in the figure shows that there are more studies that were used in meta-analysis research to investigate a specific HLP. So what our team found was that, and along the vertical side, you can also see the green boxes are the 6 practices that we've identified to develop the resources that we will discuss today. So our research team discovered that there was variability in the HLPs in terms of the disability categories that are represented in the literature base when looking at meta-analysis research. And so you can see that there are some areas such as the low incidence disability categories where there's less meta-analysis research. And so this is something to consider when looking at the evidence base. However, the 6 practices that we selected, there is variability across the disability categories that are represented. So some conclusions for our research that we use to inform the development of the resources today that we'll discuss today are that although we included 75 meta-analyses in our systematic review in our research study, the studies included in the meta-analyses really placed an emphasis on elementary grade bands, and more research across the board for HLPs, instructional practices, and students with disabilities in general is needed in middle and high school. And there are several HLPs and disability categories that are absent from meta-analysis literature, but this is perhaps due to a few different reasons. One of them being that there needs to be enough evidence to conduct a meta-analysis. Therefore, a lot of the low incidence disability categories may have inadvertently been missing from our systematic review. Another reason may be that researchers can consider other methods for investigating high level practice literature besides looking at meta-analysis research. And although there were some categories, disability categories that were not as prevalent in the meta-analysis research, when we are looking at the instructional practices that we're talking about today, they all had a large amount of evidence, and many of the meta-analyses also reported effectiveness of those practices, which guided our development of the resources. And so I will turn things over to Sarah.
Great, thank you so much, Gena. So as Gena has talked about, one of the things that we wanted to investigate was the evidence base, or maybe I should say the extent of the evidence base of the high leverage practices, or HLPs. And when we think about a definition of an evidence-based practice, this is something that has been shown time after time to show consistent and positive results to improve the academics or behavior of students with disabilities. And both IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, emphasize the importance of the use of practices with an evidence base. And these may be referred to with different names. Sometimes this might be called research-based or research validated, or maybe scientifically validated. There are similar terms, but we will use the term evidence-based practice today. Now, as our team thought about evidence-based practices, one of the things that we realized was that many evidence-based practices relate to a set of materials or a strategy. Therefore, evidence-based practices or a single evidence-based practice are going to be typically narrower in focus than compared to the HLPs. So in today's presentation and in the Progress Center materials that you are going to see, we focus focused on evidence-based practices that are really essential to use with students with disabilities. And each of these evidence-based practices are not only thought of as important practices, but as Gena just showed us, these have an extensive evidence base that has been vetted according to rigorous criteria. So we're going to go on to the next slide. And on this slide, it's just going to announce that we are going to now launch into the 6 evidence-based practices that we will highlight today. So in the Progress Center materials, we wanted to focus on evidence-based practices, and these all have an extensive evidence base. So today we're going to focus on planning for instruction. So what happens before we work on academics or behavior with a student with disabilities. Our second, second topic is delivering instruction. So what happens during instruction? The third is reviewing and intensifying instruction. And so this is really essential because what we start off doing with a student with a disability may not always be enough for that student. And so it's really important to review and intensify based on data. And then fourth, we'll talk about using cognitive and metacognitive strategies to help students with academics or behavior. Fifth, we'll talk about teaching social behaviors. And sixth, we'll talk about using instructional technology. Now, across these 6 resources, we relied on this cycle that you see here to think about data-based decision-making. That's a real big thing in special education, and I would say it's at the heart of special education. We want to collect ongoing data and make ongoing decisions for students with disabilities so that we really know what is working for that student. And if something is not working, we are going to revise quickly and move forward. So in this cycle that you see here, this 3-phase cycle has a need for teachers to plan their instruction. And when we think about planning for instruction, we're first going to set meaningful learning targets. We're going to determine a sequence of instruction to help us be on track to meet those targets. And we're going to set clear objectives that are going to be used each lesson to move toward that target. When we think about delivery of instruction, this should involve providing modeling and think alouds, so students really get an idea of what this academic skill or what this behavioral skill looks like and sounds like. We want to embed lots of practice opportunities for students, and we also want to embed many opportunities for students to respond and receive feedback to those responses. And then as we move to the reviewing and intensifying instruction, here's where we are going to do this as needed. We are going to collect data, both formal and informal data sources, and we're going to figure out if that's meeting the needs of students or if we need to intensify to better meet the needs of our students. And at the Progress Center, we suggest that this cycle should be used for both academics and behavior. Now on this next slide, you can see a screenshot over on the left of 2 of the 6 briefs from the Progress Center. These briefs are downloadable. I know someone has already put them in the chat and may put them in the chat again, so you have easy access to these. But in each brief, there are several consistent topics. First, there's a section about what do teachers need to know. So this always provides background information on the practice, whether it's teaching social behavior or instructional technology. And in this section, you'll find a lot of the research that supports the use of this, either teaching social behavior, instructional technology, or the content on any of the other briefs. Then you will follow with a section around planning and individualizing instruction. So this gets at what to do. So how do you teach social behavior, or how do you use instructional technology? Then most often there follows a section about access to the general education classroom. This helps special educators understand how to connect with general educators in a meaningful way so that students with disabilities have programming across the settings in which they learn. And then we always finish with a section about how to get started. So this is usually 3 or 4 tips on quickly how to teach social behavior or how to teach instructional or use instructional technology and so on. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kary, who's going to talk you through the brief about planning for instruction. Kary?
Thank you, Sarah. So the first practice we're going to really briefly dive into today is planning for instruction. As you know, planning for instruction is critical for both student and teacher success. And I'm sure you're wondering, what could I possibly learn here today that I already haven't been taught in my preparation or professional development programs? Well, a refresher as we start the school year is always a good idea, and perhaps you'll pick up a new way of approaching teaching. So when we talk about planning for instruction, we talk about the thinking that happens before getting in front of students. Some of us are lucky enough to have designated planning and collaborative time during our school days, and some of us do our best planning and thinking on those long drives home from work. Planning is constantly happening for all of us. The planning I want to focus on today is the structured planning you do when you're writing your lessons or your units. When you're planning for instruction, or when you're planning instruction for students with disabilities, there are 3 key steps to keep in your mind. They are the first one, which is setting meaningful learning targets. This is not something we do off the cuff. Setting meaningful learning targets takes a healthy amount of work. And when I'm talking about targets, I'm talking about long-term outcomes. We really want to make sure that we are aligning our instruction to student long-term learning goals, and we're considering the skills that students need to have before learning concepts. We also need to think about how our students' current levels of performance and where those are at. So this might mean you have to review some of the data from your students, even in the past school year. Then we want to make sure that the target we set for each lesson is high, but achievable. From there, we go to the second step. And that second step is to determine the appropriate sequence of instruction. This is where you want to make sure you're considering everything I just talked about, and you're going to work backwards from that end goal. You want to ask yourself, what steps do I need to take when teaching my students this content so that they are able to reach that target? This sequence of instruction may span several lessons. And then finally, the third step, which is setting clear objectives for each lesson. Here's where we really get specific about the content that we give to our students and those practice opportunities. This is what we want our students to achieve at the end of the lesson. And this should be measurable in some way so that we can keep a record and some data to review later so that we can inform our future instruction. Next, Sarah's going to talk to you again about how we actually deliver instruction.
That's right. Thanks so much, Kary. So as Kary said, a lot of the information in these briefs is going to be things that you may have heard before and you may be doing in your classroom, but it's a good refresher. And then I hope that in each of these briefs, you're going to find new content that's really going to help you take your teaching above and beyond. So in the materials around delivering instruction, we really focus on what teachers need to think about as you're delivering the instruction for students with disabilities. So this follows the planning for instruction that Kary just talked about. Now, in this brief, we talk about using explicit instruction. So a thoughtful combination of modeling and practice. And one of the other things we talk about in this brief are those supports that are absolutely necessary to use during both modeling and practice. So in this brief, you can learn a lot more about how do you ask the right questions. So are you asking students a mix of higher level questions to really get them thinking and engaging them in discussion? Are you also asking low level questions to have just brief checks for understanding? The second thing we focus on is, are you asking students to elicit frequent responses? This can be done in any number of ways. Maybe you have students give a thumbs up or thumbs down. Maybe students raise their hand. Maybe the class gives a choral response, or you ask for individual student responses. Responses can also be partner work or working in a small group. A response could also ask a student to show something. Show me how you wrote that sentence, or show me how you showed that with fraction tiles. It could also be using technology. There are so many different ways for students to respond, but the idea here is that students are frequently responding so that you have many, many checks during your lesson to see how students are doing with the content, whether you need to redirect, whether you need to go back and unpack something a little bit more, or whether you can move on. The third thing we talk about in this brief in terms of supports during a modeling and practice is providing feedback. So as you ask questions and provide prompts and as students frequently respond, we want to make sure that you are providing feedback to the students on a timely basis. So are you providing appropriate affirmative feedback when students are doing well? And are you providing appropriate corrective feedback when students maybe need a little bit of redirection and you need to help them move forward? What does that affirmative feedback sound like? And what does that corrective feedback sound like? And then finally, we talk about maintaining a brisk pace. So are you yourself organized? Are you ready to do the lesson? Do you have all of the materials? Are you ready to go? Oftentimes when we're teaching students with disabilities, we don't have a lot of time with these students. So if you have a 25-minute intervention session, we need to maximize those 25 minutes. So it's really important to maintain a brisk pace and be ready to go with your teaching. And each of these supports does have an extensive evidence base to support its use, and that's why we included them in this brief about delivering instruction. Now I'm going to turn it over to Gena, who's going to talk about reviewing and intensifying instruction.
All right, so Kary and Sarah just reviewed the critical aspects of instruction, including planning and delivering instruction. And during and after a teacher engages in those practices, a teacher will also want to review and consider the needs for intensifying instruction. And reviewing and intensifying instruction is our next practice. Teachers use several data sources to inform instruction and the adaptations that they may make to instruction. And even when teachers use high quality instruction, such as explicit instruction methods, some students with disabilities will continue to struggle to meet learning goals and objectives in the classroom. So one thing that a teacher can consider is reviewing instruction to determine what could be intensified. So intensifying instruction is one process that teachers can use to provide specially designed instruction by changing the instructional content, delivery, or method to match the student's unique learning needs. There are several strategies that a teacher may use to intensify instruction, but the New Progress Center brief specifically highlights 4 practices, including, or 4 aspects, including intervention dosage, opportunities to respond, alignment, and transfer. And so intervention dosage may refer to components of instruction such as the total sessions or the length of a session that a teacher may decide to increase in order to intensify instruction. This may also refer to group size. And in order to intensify instruction, some students may benefit from a decreased group size. Opportunities to respond are impacted by intervention dosage. And for example, smaller group sizes can result in more individual opportunities for students to engage with the content. And teachers can increase the frequency and vary the type of response opportunities that students may have in the classroom. Another opportunity that teachers have to intensify instruction is through adjusting the sequence of instruction by considering alignment. So teachers may maximize alignment by responding to how well does the instruction address a student's specific educational needs, or how well does the instruction incorporate a specific focus on grade appropriate learning standards. And as students with disabilities are served in many different types of settings, alignment may be an important factor to consider regarding access to the general education classroom or how you collaborate with general educators. And then finally, the last aspect of intensifying instruction that this brief covers is transfer, or how well students are making connections between content and ideas. And teachers may also need to explicitly teach students for transfer, which with the figure on all of the brief shows that when you need to explicitly teach something, it is a cycle, and you may need to go back to those aspects of delivery and instruction that Sarah just reviewed. Now I'll turn things over to Dan.
Dan, you're muted.
Thank you. Thanks, Gena. So we will now turn to 2 areas where teachers can expand the framework for planning, delivering, and intensifying instruction to other areas that are important for classroom instruction. So the first area we're going to talk about is cognitive and metacognitive strategies. Cognitive and metacognitive strategies address student executive functioning domains. So executive functioning refers to the mental processes that allow us to maintain attention, focus on the most important information, and organize our thoughts to address both areas of academic and behavioral need. In the research briefs and modules, we focus on providing guidance on critical areas related to executive functioning, including goal setting, self-monitoring, and the use of graphic organizers. So for instance, goal setting provides an opportunity for students to establish a feasible objective and measure their progress against that goal. Goal setting can be used to support daily work activities, such as reading and math fluency, and the number of problems correct. When students reach their goals, new ones can be established and the student can see their progress. Self-monitoring refers to a process where students track their attention to determine whether they've stayed on task during a time period. For self-monitoring, teachers provide students with a checklist with prompts, asking them whether they've stayed on task or have met classroom expectations. Students are prompted on a set schedule to rate themselves. The intervals can range from a class period for students in need of less support to as little as 5 minutes for those needing a little bit more support to monitor their behavior. Graphic organizers are supports designed to help students plan their approach to instructional tasks and organize their thoughts. For instance, students preparing a writing composition or getting ready to tackle a word problem may benefit from a systematic approach for coordinating their thoughts. Keep in mind, some students may require clear and intentional support and practice to use graphic organizers, self-monitoring, and goal setting to get the most out of each of these interventions. Within the context of prior areas addressed during this webinar, teachers must plan to use cognitive and metacognitive strategies and may need to intensify them through direct instruction of the processes and procedures or providing more frequent delivery depending on the particular support in question. The next practice we will discuss is teaching social behaviors, a critical component for supporting many students access learning and ensuring success in the least restrictive environment. Successful teaching of social behaviors begins with developing a clear set of expectations. Well-constructed behavioral expectations communicate the classroom norms to students and establish behavioral objectives for students to meet, rather than having them trying to avoid behaviors when rules are not positively stated. As such, teachers should develop a series of 3 to 5 positive statements to capture the expectations for student learning within the classroom. So for example, statements such as demonstrate respect to classmates and teachers, raise hand when you have a question, and treat the classroom and materials nicely sets the tone for teachers to recognize positive behavior and maintain an upbeat and inviting classroom for students. Of course, some students require additional support, and that's where intensification strategies come into play. For students requiring additional behavioral support, we recommend building off the classroom expectations and focusing on teaching, modeling, and rewarding positive behaviors. For instance, if a student demonstrates behaviors inconsistent with the classroom expectations, teachers may need to identify a pro-social behavior to replace the unwanted behavior the student displays. Just as an example, if a student calls out during instruction, teachers may seek to replace calling out with hand raising. Once the teacher selects the replacement behavior, then it's necessary to arrange the classroom to support the student demonstrate that positive behavior and encourage it subsequently. In the case of hand raising, the teacher may decide to provide intermittent reminders or provide alternative response methods such as whiteboards or response cards. If the student displays the behavior, it is important to provide praise or tokens or some other positive consequence to promote the use of that new behavior. I'm going to turn it back over to Kary.
Thank you, Dan. The last practice we're going to talk today about is using instructional technology. So instructional technology is the practice of using high-tech tools such as computers or different kinds of softwares, smart boards even, to boost academic and behavioral instruction. Here, the technology becomes part of the content of learning and is used as a learning tool to deliver content. There are many considerations teachers need to make when incorporating technology into lessons, and those details are covered in depth in the brief. But most importantly, teachers need to consider the skills that their students already have with the technology tool that they're using, as some of the technology skills might need to be explicitly taught. The biggest takeaway here, though, is that instructional technology is not the same as assistive technology, as assistive technology is about overcoming barriers and gaining access to curriculum. So more on that can be found in the module that we'll talk about in a moment and at the end of this presentation. Like the other practices we've talked about today, when you use instructional technology, you will plan with measurable objectives to incorporate that technology into your students' learning. You're going to want to make sure that the technology that you're choosing to use does not become a barrier to learning, but rather a way to enhance learning so that your students can get to those learning targets. Of course, you'll plan to use formative and summative assessments as you incorporate your tech into your instruction, and you'll do all the good steps of reviewing the data and determining whether or not you need to intensify or individualize instruction as you support your students in reaching those learning goals. As we wrap up today, we want to draw your attention to some of the resources that we have available to you. So coming soon, we have some interactive modules on each one of these practices. These modules are short but sweet. They dive into the details and give us step-by-step guidance for successfully implementing all of the practices we've talked about today. Included within these modules, you'll hear from some practitioners, teachers out in the field through some video interviews. I'll now toss it over to Tessie to talk about the Progress Center website.
Thank y'all. I would just want to give you all a special thanks for all of the great work that you all have done. I mean, we shared some of the research with us to help sort of justify the work that we're doing. And then thank you for sharing some of the current and upcoming resources. If you would like to access these particular resources, we have a couple of places in which you can do that. You can visit our website at promotingprogress.org, and we'll put that in the chat box. And if you look under that first box, which is the implementation, what you'll find is there is an effective delivery and instruction pull-down tab. And you'll be able to find all of the briefs that were mentioned today there. You'll also find in the other blue box is our training tab. And under our training tab, you'll find our online modules. Right now, we have several online modules that are around the development, as I mentioned earlier, of the quality educational programming, but you'll also start to find these as they roll out in terms of modules for each of the practice areas that were referenced today. And so now I would like to open it up to questions. I'd like to ask our presenters. They can turn their videos on, and you all can respond to those and how you feel most appropriate. But we did get some questions. Is that where should we start with these? I mean, there were 6 that were listed. Should folks start with all 6? Should they prioritize? How do they know where to go?
That's a really good question, Tessie. I would suggest starting with the planning for instruction, delivering instruction, and the reviewing instruction, those 3 briefs, because I think they really help you with that 3-phase cycle of teaching. And then we see that the next 3, so the using metacognitive and cognitive strategies, the teaching social behaviors, and the using instructional technology will be really embedded within any instruction that you are providing. So I would start with planning and delivering and reviewing.
Just to extend that thought, something that is captured in the materials that we didn't address today, unfortunately, due to time, is that it's really important to take stock of what your instruction entails and what strategies might students benefit from within the context of your instruction. So that requires you taking some time to think about what the developmental stage of the students are, what the learning task goals are, what those demands are. And so that's all part of that planning process that can be really important for making sure that you're selecting appropriate targeted supports.
Great. We had several parents on today's call, and so I'm curious how you're seeing that parents may be able to use these resources that were shared today.
Hi, this is Gena. I actually teach a class on collaborating with families and working with parents, and I have worked with parents in former careers, and I think that one thing that parents might be able to take away from the brief is understanding how a teacher may be approaching instruction, whether that's academics or behavior with a child with a disability, and that goes for caregivers or guardians in addition to parents. And it might also give caregivers good, or I guess a good starting point about how to ask questions in meetings with teachers or throughout the process when teachers are determining goals or different instructional strategies that they may use in the classroom. I don't know if anyone else has something to add to that.
Yeah, and I will just say, I know Amy Peterson and myself also work for the National Center on Intensive Intervention, and a lot of these practices are embedded within some of the resources that were promoted under COVID to help parents also support instructional delivery in the home. And we can put that link in the chat box. But I appreciate it's that really collaborative is understanding how is the teacher teaching and how can the parent also supplement or enhance that teaching in the home environment. So we also have a question that there are a number of folks who are working with CEDAR or some other entities in which they have already identified a number of practices that they're focusing on. What do you recommend in terms of should they pivot and move to these practices given the effects that you're finding, or should they sort of stay the course with what they have already selected?
I think what's really great about the resources that we've developed for the Progress Center, and this also addresses another question that I saw about grade level, is that the 6 practices we selected to develop the resources around can really be embedded in any sort of program that is already in place at a school, regardless of the grade level or regardless of what specific programs are in place at the school. And I wouldn't say to kind of abandon what schools have been working with or are in the process of adopting, but finding ways to enhance instruction for students with disabilities while keeping all of these 6 practices in mind while designing instruction.
Yeah, and so I think that kind of aligns with the question that we see in the chat box, and it's like the language is used when we discuss these practices. I think the intent was to organize them in a way to get the instructional cycle, but can you talk more explicitly around how these align with those CEC practices, the CEC and CEDAR practices that you mentioned earlier?
Tessie, can you rephrase that question?
Yeah, so you all are using terminology that in labeling the practices that are not like a direct connection to the CEC. So folks are asking, how do those align? How do these 6 practices align with the HLPs and the way they're listed on the current website?
So I think you're right, Tessie, in that there is just difference in terminology sometimes across resources. But when we started the presentation, we talked a little bit about how the CEC high leverage practice materials and documents really guided our research study, which ultimately helped us identify more narrow practices, how Sarah was discussing specific practices with an evidence base that are narrower. And so we have seen, or the HLP document definitely describes the practices using broader terminology, and we have kind of picked those really salient features from those practices that have an evidence base. So it's not necessarily that they're in conflict, but definitely a narrower focus.
It sounds like you all are defining them very concretely to really help local educators be able to understand that practice, implement that practice, and evaluate the extent to which they're implementing that practice.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good.
And in terms of the definition, we really wanted practitioners to be able to take the briefs and have immediate next steps in the classroom or in their conversations with colleagues. And we felt that using a really narrow targeted focus was the best way for educators to kind of inform next steps, to understand what do I do next as a special education teacher.
Now, I know there's a pretty robust conversation going on in the chat box, so I want to bring that out. And there was a question around how do the UDL principles, how are they embedded or aligning with this work? So Kary, I'll go to you first, and then
Sure.
Sarah, I know you have some comments.
Yeah, so we were talking about UDL and the three main principles, which are representation, engagement, and action and expression. And you're going to see those principles across all the briefs. It's not one particular brief, since UDL is such a framework that we use for learning and teaching. So when thinking about planning and really thinking about working backwards in your planning, you're going to see that a lot in the sequencing section of the planning and delivering briefs specifically, but you will see hints of UDL across all 6 of the briefs as we kind of guide practitioners on how to get started.
And then we did have a question, and I think, Gena, you kind of mentioned this in your portion, but maybe some folks can talk about it, is you mentioned that most of the research is in the elementary. So what are middle school and high school teachers to do with these practices? What's your recommendation? And Sarah, I know you do a lot of work in middle school, so I don't know if you want to start us off.
Yeah, so one of the things that's really important to know when Gena showed us those really beautiful figures around our meta-analysis that we did around the high leverage practices is that we relied on research that has occurred. And for probably many reasons, more research has been conducted at the elementary grades. My hypothesis is usually that is the reason, because it's easier to do work in elementary schools than it is in middle and high schools when students are changing classes and even sometimes moving buildings during their school day. It's just a lot harder to do research in those settings. And so we relied on research that has occurred to inform the evidence-based practices that we're talking about today. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't any research to support middle school and high school use of these different evidence-based practices. In fact, if we can get into the individual studies, if you are really interested, go ahead and reach out to our team. But there were studies that did represent students in different disability categories from the middle school and high school grades. And so we would say that these are important practices to use across grade levels. And what we hope is in the next decade or the next 2 decades, that more research is conducted at the middle and high school levels to investigate and add to the evidence base for those different types of practices. And so as Tessie, you said, I have done quite a bit of work in middle school with a lot of our colleagues, and we focus on math. And we do see that planning and delivery of instruction and reviewing and intensifying, using database decision rules and using instructional technology and using metacognitive strategies and teaching social behaviors, those are all important things to do in the middle school grades, just as they are in the elementary and high school levels.
Great. So I'm going to just ask each of you, it's a single prompt or a question is, we did have some questions about, can we share these? And of course, please share away. But we have a lot of administrators who are on the call learning about these. What would you recommend is a next step to actually use these, right? Should we just print them off and put them in their teacher mailboxes? Or what's something you would recommend is a good next step for administrators? And Daniel, we'll start with you.
That's a really great question, because oftentimes what we see is that we want to disseminate quality information, but we, like you said, Tessie, is that sometimes we'll just print it off, put it in their faculty mailbox as a suggestion that they might take up the practice. One thing that I would suggest administrators do is focus on professional development that's going to focus particularly on the needs of special educators. And so providing them with the context, whether that's through professional learning communities, bringing in a speaker who is an expert in this particular area, to come in and provide targeted support to teachers who are looking really from a special education perspective, craving more instruction that's going to meet them, more professional development that's going to help them meet the needs of their students. So that would be my first recommendation, is not just to print off and suggest, but to actually build a school context where special educators can learn and learn to implement well.
Great suggestion. How about you, Sarah?
Yeah, I would just add to what Dan said, is that this has to be ongoing. So it's something that occurs during the school year and across the school year, so that if you have maybe 1 or 2 professional development sessions now or in November, December, that teachers have the time to meet with teachers maybe in their school or across the district to talk about these ideas. How are you doing this? What are some of the barriers? What are some of the ways that you've found success with using technology or teaching social behaviors? And it shouldn't just occur in this school year, but it has to be ongoing. So continual support based on the professional development that teachers have received.
Great. And Gena?
And I would just also add that if you are a school facing some challenges with resources for providing professional development that maybe has a cost associated with it, you could look to teachers in your district who you could identify as experts in each of the instructional practices. That's one of the things that we did for the mini modules, was we found current practitioners who are experts in those practices and interviewed them. So we know that they exist in the schools, and I think leaning on them to maybe lead some of the PLCs that Sarah and Dan mentioned, and also having teachers set goals around those practices. I don't know about everyone else, but I tend to not get much done unless I have a deadline or a specific goal that I want to achieve. So helping teachers set those goals around maybe gains that they want to make in their instruction related to the practices.
Great. And Kary?
I'm going to take it one step further with these PLCs. I think our administrators can use a lot of these practices and model them. Model that you're planning for your PLC meetings, model that while you're delivering that instruction, model how you're reviewing the data you're collecting from your PLCs, use instructional technology during your PLC meetings. You're going to have your teachers that are going to be shouter outers and those kinds of things, right? And so use some of the replacement behavior stuff that we've just talked about, really modeling for your staff, the practices that we've talked about today can take your PLC meetings one step further.
I think these are great suggestions, and we know there's a lot of demands on folks out there. So I think, start small, make a plan, and follow through with that plan. I'll also say that the Progress Center is here to also support you. So if you do have some needs, please contact us, and on our next page, you'll see that. But we do have a Q&A box. We are working with local educators. We do have resources that we can connect you with to help you implement or start this school year. If you do want to stay connected with us or stay up to date with all of these resources that are coming out, please sign up for our newsletter on our homepage. And we highly recommend that you follow us on our Twitter and Facebook, which is K-12 Progress.